Thank you, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be on the Secular Student Alliance board. I just joined a few months ago, so I'm very excited to meet students here, student leaders. I've been spending as much time as I can going to your sessions and meeting people, so please do chat with me here, afterwards, at lunch. So quick about me, I'm the Digital Strategies and Social Media Manager at the National LGBTQ Task Force. We've been around for 43 years. We were originally the National Gay Task Force, then the National Gay Lesbian Task Force, and in 2015 I was part of our rebranding process where we changed our name to the National LGBTQ Task Force to be more fully inclusive. I'm also a board member of the Trans United Fund. The Trans United Fund is building a unified political voice for the transgender community. We are the first C4. If you know what a C4 is, they can endorse candidates and engage in lobbying. We're the first C4 to be promoting trans candidates exclusively, and right now we're supporting Danica Rome in Virginia, who would be the highest elected official in U.S. history if she wins state delegate in Virginia, and we helped her win her primary. Finally, a board member of Secular Student Alliance. And then here's a few other groups I've been part of. I actually skated 5 years with the DC Rollergirls. I was doing medical marijuana advocacy in DC and helped bring the first dispensaries there. That's a really fun story. I worked with the American Human Association for a year doing fundraising, and I helped Greenpeace with their Save the Arctic campaign, including rappelling off a building to drop a billboard. And then NOI is now defunct, but I was a new media fellow at New Organizing Institute. A few pictures, my roller derby team on the All-Stars in the top left. I toured the country. Some drug policy activism I was doing in DC, where I really pushed the intersectionality with racial justice. There's me learning to drop banners at the Greenpeace Manatee River Action Camp. I spent a week rappelling off their structure and then went to several other training camps. And finally, I've spoken at the White House twice. I've been invited there about 5 or 6 times, all over Obama, of course. And I was spoke at the bisexual briefing, I spoke at the trans briefing, and I did social media for this Champions of Change one. This is my team that I go to conferences with and speak on racial justice and trans leadership. Lala Zanel, who's an awesome black trans advocate who works with the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Projects in New York. Ariana Lint, who works in South Florida with Latina and HIV positive people. Lydia Brown, who is genderqueer, does by pronouns they and them, is autistic. Their tag and their brand is Autistic Hoya. And they've really been pushing intersectionality between being trans and being autistic and disabled. Here's my team again. This was at Netroots. This was at our Creating Change conference. Ariana had to run, but she was part of it. Finally, I'm a total geek. I paint miniatures. That's my hobby, and I play games. If anyone's familiar with Warhammer 40k, War Machine, Malifaux, and then Zombicide, I'm painting this girl. Right now, I'm going to be slaying that zombie. So, I also do cosplay. I love the show Star Wars: The Force of Evil. So, if you ever want to talk about gaming or geekdom, I'm totally into it. Finally, so just a little bit more about the work I do. The Creating Change Conference is the National LGBTQ Task Force's biggest conference, and I'm the social media director for it. We have about 3,000, 4,000 people, and I've been trying to bring more secular programming to the conference each year. So I worked with SSA, several other groups, to do a really cool panel this year. So I'm talking a lot about myself. I was given kind of carte blanche to talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. I really want to spend a lot of time with questions. So, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about racial justice and intersectionality. But then I really want to spend a lot of time on questions. This is our Creating Change conference. Again, we have 3,000 people there. That's our all-day Racial Justice Institute that happens on Wednesday. And mark your calendars, January 24th through 28th is the next conference in Washington, D.C. Then we'll also be holding a full-day Racial Justice Institute in September. And I highly encourage students to come and I'll tell you if you apply for a scholarship, you can probably get a full ride. This is fun. I do social media. There's been some sessions today. Kind of work I'm doing promoting the Creating Change hashtag. We got about 9 million reach in a week on Twitter and about 409,000 reach on Instagram. I can plot this day by day. I do a lot of statistical analysis. What's really fun for me is to see what people are talking about at conference: queer, power, women, black, racial justice, trans. Notice how trans has been increasingly one of the biggest topics. I don't see gay as one of the biggest topics. I see queer and trans and LGBTQ, because that's really where the movement is going. And a lot of stuff related to racial justice, like black and Latinx. You know, Union Fuerza was our third biggest hashtag, and that is referring to the Latina Institute. So we're seeing a lot more intersectionality in the LGBTQ movement, which I'm excited about. I'd also like to see a lot more secular. This is fun. This is our Twitter reach. We had about 300,000 reached on our Twitter day of. So to speak a little bit more about our work against religious exemptions, this was a rally we held the day before Trump was going to drop his big executive order, religious freedom restoration, religious exemption act. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as we thought, but we led this protest at the White House and brought, you know, dozens of other organizations there and called it the License to Discriminate Executive Order, and pointed out how it could be used to discriminate against religious minorities, take away reproductive rights, and attack LGBTQ people. And that is actually our faith work director, who I work with a lot, Naomi Leapart. She's a black, queer, you know, lesbian faith. She's a minister. And we speak a lot about how LGBTQ people of faith are way more supportive about LGBTQ issues than people think. And then finally, a lot of what I love doing is disability advocacy crossed with trans advocacy, and this is my partner in crime, Victoria Rodriguez-Roldan, who is a trans Latina and white organization. At the Trump Global Gag Reproductive Justice Rally on International Women's Day, at a rally, this is Candace Bond, who's a bisexual black, you know, woman at our organization, speaking out against the Muslim ban. This was fighting HB2 in North Carolina. That's Reverend Deborah Hopkins, who's a black trans woman. That's Camden Hargrove, who's a black trans man. And a lot of the message was, my faith doesn't discriminate. Again, people of faith support LGBTQ equality. My religion doesn't discriminate in Spanish. And then this was a sit-in at the state capitol. Finally, one more interfaith thing I did is I helped run the, people know, anyone here know what the World Congress of Families is? Okay, they're a massive hate group, massive. And their whole thing is to export religious right propaganda across the world. They've done a lot in Africa to pass bills that criminalize and can kill people for being LGBTQ. People have heard the Kill the Gays bill. It's because the World Congress of Families is exporting homophobia and transphobia to Africa. And so they had a conference in Salt Lake City, and we decided to kind of not interrupt their conference, but hold a pro-LGBTQ conference at the same time and use their hashtags and try to get media to cover our conference and try to get ours in the news instead of theirs, or to confuse people, because they were holding a Faith and Family Summit, and we called ours a Faith and Family Summit. And I helped bring trans voices, although we also brought in a Muslim imam, Daia Abdullah, Tonya Rawls, who's a black lesbian bishop, God, I'm blanking, Rodney McKenzie, who's a black reverend, and then two other black faith leaders, and I'm blanking, but this was years ago. So that's some interfaith work we do. Next step is, I really want to get more atheists involved. I need more atheist leaders involved in this movement. And I'm very happy to talk about that. There's been several sessions here, including my Secular Coalition for America, about why we need to build a broad progressive movement. So at the same time, we're showing that LGBTQ people of faith are, LGBT positive and do intersectional work. I want to see more atheists getting involved in this work. Again, I've touched on the secular movement, but my whole focus has been LGBT. So it's 11:47. I ran through that very fast because mostly I wanted to answer questions about my work, about interfaith, and about LGBTQ issues in general. So anyone have questions for me? Yep, from here.
So I attended Creating Change last year for the first year. I went to a couple of the secular panels. Can you touch a little bit about kind of the challenges, maybe not even necessarily within the organization, but the larger movement about having non-believers included in the conversation? A lot of the sessions I saw were very faith-based, which was helpful, but I didn't see a lot of secular discussion, so I appreciate that you're kind of pushing that.
I've been pushing it for years. The task force, I have to say, is funded to do a lot of interfaith work, and that's part of our strategic plan, is pushing pro-LGBTQ voices. But I've really been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing for atheists and humanists to be at the table. And one of the best ways that we can have more representation is people just join our host committee in DC, if you're DC local, or join our practice, I hate the name, the Practice Spirit to Justice Working Group, where we've started including the LGBTQ Humanist Alliance from AHA, and we're happy to include more atheist voices. And I've been pushing our faith work director, Naomi Leapart, every chance I get to include more voices of atheists. So I'm very happy to help be a conduit to bring more people into our work. So, yes.
Well, first off, what was that name again?
The Practice Spirit to Justice Working Group. Is that the name you're referring to?
Yeah.
And then at the Creating Change conference.
Okay.
And then our faith work director is Naomi Leapart. Does that get it? Yeah.
I'll have to read that. Yes, thank you.
Okay. What's up?
I had a question.
Yeah.
How would you respond to a person who would state that intersectionality dilutes the messages of these individual groups? When you intersect, then you almost have less integrity of the individual cause movements. How would you respond to someone who says that?
So I was at the Women in Secularism conference maybe 3 years ago. I've gone every year I can. And there was a speaker on stage who said, if your mission doesn't include intersectionality, your mission is too narrow. I can't not live out intersectionality. I'm also Latina, I'm also trans, I'm also a woman. Intersectionality is part of my work. Intersectionality is part of our work. We are majority people of color led, including Naomi, Victoria, Candace, Camden, Victoria Kirby York. I think that one way to start intersectionality is seeing who the leaders in your groups are. Getting more trans people, people of color to be in leadership positions. It has to be part of your strategic plan. But the strength of intersectionality is also building a movement. You think that you're becoming too narrow, but in fact, you're giving more opportunities to do organizing with other groups. We are part of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which has I think around 120 groups working together for progressive social change. And we support each other. They're having a big racial justice voting rights rally, we go. We're having a big LGBTQ rally, they bring their people. Stuff like that. You work together. So, anything else? Yes.
More of a comment than anything. I just went to the Humanist Association National Conference in Charleston, and was recently certified as a humanist celebrant. And one of the things we talked about in our celebrant meeting was having coming out ceremonies and naming ceremonies for our trans audience and our, I teach at a local high school too. So having ceremonies and having celebrations for the LGBTQ group. And so I want to put that out there to everybody and anyone who would be interested in having a ceremony or making a celebration of their coming out or putting away their dead name. The humanist group is there and available for those.
Yeah, I love the celebrants, you know. Thank you. Yes.
So there's been a movement kind of on social media from a very small part of the secular and atheist community that's very resistant to social justice issues right now. What's your perspective on how to respond on social media to those sorts of people that are denigrating LGBTQ rights and feminism, that sort of thing?
A few answers to that. One is I just keep pushing the social justice message, and the more I push it, the more people get on that message. And I don't really pay attention to trolls. I block them. You know, they say, "Oh, I hate your organization now. I'm not going to give money anymore." And I'm like, "You probably don't have to be giving money anyways." And the more that, you know, I push what we want to push, racial justice, trans justice, you know, I can show graphs of, yeah, we got a bunch of unlikes and unfollows, but ultimately we're getting way more, you know? We had this phenomenal thing that people are familiar with the Equality March. We had thousands of people come to DC and march for LGBTQ equality, first time for like a decade or so. Our Facebook following grew from about 130,000 to 160,000, like overnight, because we were pushing this intersectional message. So literally, like within 3 days, it grew by 30,000. It was crazy. Because we're pushing this social justice message. Second answer to that is like trans exclusionary radical feminists. Who's heard that term? Terms? Oh my God, there's a great blog. If you don't know what it is, there's a great blog called Trans Advocate. They hold TERF Week each year to like talk about how evil and horrible these so-called feminists who want to exclude trans women from womanhood and feminism are. And I've written quite a bit about TERFs. I'm actually going to be published in a book soon, talking about my experiences being a trans atheist. I think it's, oh my God, I'm trying to remember the working title, but it's with Karen Garst, who previously published Women Leaving Religion, so it's going to be the second anthology. And a lot of TERF ideology is based on pseudoscience from the 1950s and 60s by Professor John Money at Johns Hopkins University, who, yes, he treated trans patients, but his whole idea was you only treat trans patients as the last resort, otherwise you try to convert them, because homosexuality is a sin and awful. He was Catholic and totally a pseudoscientist. He's famous for trying to raise two twins in different genders, because one of them had like their genitals like burnt in a freak accident, or like, there's an issue with like when they were circumcised and their genitals got messed up, and they were both, you know, assigned male at birth. So he told the parents like, oh, raise this one as a woman, raise this one as a man. You know, basically he said, oh yeah, we can just determine what sex they are and change that and raise them. And what happened was they were deeply unhappy, and you know, as soon as the person who had been told to live as a woman found out their past, you know, they decided to transition to be a man, and they had to take hormones and everything because they had gone through a female puberty because of female hormones. And they transitioned, and they had a really hard time. Eventually they committed suicide, I think in their 20s or 30s, and then their twin committed suicide as well. So this is the, you know, moral integrity of this man named John Lenny, whose, you know, trans research is what these TERFs are basing their ideology off of. There's a book called The Transsexual Empire. It was published by Janice Raymond, who was a so-called feminist in the 80s. And she uses John Money's research in the 50s and 60s that's been widely discredited, but she uses it to back up her arguments that trans women are just basically cyborgs created by, scientists to invade women's spaces, and they're ultra feminine and reinforcing female gender roles, and they're gonna bring an end to women, and we have to exclude them and, drive them out of women's spaces and drive them out of society. And she was basing a lot of this also on any kind of gender identity clinic you went to. You had to constantly prove you were feminine. You had to constantly prove you're feminine. You were constantly to prove you're straight in order to get trans surgery, trans stuff. So all these trans men would appear really feminine and straight when they actually went for treatment. But in reality, they were actually all sorts of gender expressions and identities. They just had to prove this. So then all the scientists, like Dr. Paul McHugh, Dr. John Monty, Dr. Ray Blanchard, who's a total asshole, all these doctors are total assholes. They all wrote up research and were like, oh, trans women are super feminine and have female brains that are straight and all this, and it's all based off of biased research. And then the trans exclusionary radical feminists use that biased, awful research, pseudoscience, I call it, often motivated by political reasons and religious reasons, to justify that trans women aren't, women or they're danger to womanhood. So, if you just look at the history, they're so full of shit. Anyways, I think we're wrapping up. If anyone wants to kick me off the stage. Any other questions?
I wanted to just
Yeah.
back to what you were asking about how to deal with trolls online, and I think one, to block and not engage, and I often tag folk that are accomplices and say, get your folk. So
Yeah.
you can do that work because it's exhausting, but another piece is if you do decide to engage in conversation, you maybe have some relationship with somebody, I think it's often, how dare you tell me that my issue is not legit? I don't tell you that your issue isn't legit. So it's kind of varies like blinders. I try to relate it to a different group of folk. So sometimes that's helpful, but most of the time you just gotta block because you look and they usually have 12 followers anyway, it doesn't matter.
And also there's a very big difference between I'm running an organization, Facebook and Twitter, and I have the ability to ban and moderate people, and they're not, yes, actually it can be really hurtful when I get attacks on the work I'm doing, but it's very different from cyberbullying and cyber harassment, which has a whole nother level of how you respond to it, and especially cyberbullying is used a lot against trans kids and LGBTQ kids, and I would, they need a lot of support. Trevor Project has helped a lot of trans youth who are at risk of suicide, and cyberbullying can lead to suicide. It can lead to severe mental health issues, and it can't be taken lightly. It can be just as deadly and just as harmful as actual, in-person bullying, and often they happen together. So we have to, in our community, stop these harassers, give support to kids. There's a lot of harassment on Tumblr for young women, even just for doing fan art for their favorite comic strip. My favorite comics or cartoon is Starburst, the Force of Evil, and people get cyberbullied for liking that show. And they're mostly, kind of adolescent girls, and it's that get the bullying, and it's just really awful. So we always have to stand against that. One final thing, I would, Surly Amy, known for Surly Ramix, selling some of her swag. She did a really awesome session at Skepticon a few years ago about this art project she did called A Woman's Room Online. Check that out, A Woman's Room Online, you can Google it. And they printed out literally thousands of harassment comments on social media and on the internet, and literally paper mached an entire studio apartment out of all this harassment, all these things like kill yourself and die, I'm gonna rape you, you're a disgusting female, oh, you're really a man, all these horrible, hateful, stupid, transphobic, homophobic, sexist things, and they wallpapered an entire room and made a computer, a cat, flowers, all out of paper mache, And you could walk into the room and just see how awful, you know, it is to be literally surrounded by these comments. So, and a lot of them came from atheists. So again, I've been told to stop. You can check me out on Twitter at Lenore Gore. That was actually my old roller derby name. So Lenore Gore on Twitter and Instagram. Also on Tumblr, but my Tumblr is just fandom. Also, you know, my organization is the taskforce.org. That's the National LGBTQ Task Force at the taskforce.org. And then finally, TransUnited Fund, which should just be at transunitedfund.org. So thank you very much for having me. It's been a privilege. So.